Order. I will call Toby Perkins to move the motion. I will then call the Minister to respond. I remind other members that they may only make a speech with the prior permission, both from the member in charge of the debate and the Minister. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention for 30-minute debates. Order. Order. Toby Perkins to move the motion.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Stewart. I beg to move that this House has considered improving flood defences in Chesterfield. I'm grateful for the opportunity to introduce this debate. Flooding is a critical issue for my constituents in Chesterfield, and it is also a problem impacting people right across the country. I have seen firsthand the appalling impact that flooding has on our communities. In 2007, I was a councillor for Rother Ward on Chesterfield Borough Council, and I recall keenly the floods and how many of those who were flooded felt abandoned. Following the 2007 floods, I, along with Lifehouse Church, Chesterfield Rotary Club and Chesterfield for Optimist International, set up the Chesterfield Flood Victims Appeal, which raised around £16,000 for flood victims who had not got flood insurance. The work the committee did, meeting flood victims and helping them as they tried to put their homes and their lives together following the floods, had a lasting impact on me. And it became clear that once you have been a flood victim, you are forever a flood victim. Flood victims don't just lose. I'm happy to give way.
Jim Shannon.
For Chesterfield for bringing this forward. He's right to underline the issue for Chesterfield, which is his constituency, and obviously he should, but across the whole, all of the United Kingdom, there's a real problem in many places. I just think of my constituency of Strangford and Newton Ards in particular. 25,000 houses and properties are in the floodplain, which is bolstered by the flood banks to make sure they don't get flooded out. 1 in 33 in the coastal areas are flooded as well. And does the honourable gentleman agree that it's time to have a flood strategy, not just for Chesterfield, but indeed for all of this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, so we're going to respond to these things in a more global way?
Well, I thank him for that, and he's right that we do need a holistic approach. I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say on that. But whichever community you are in, you realise that being flooded, flood victims don't just lose irreplaceable possessions and sometimes replaceable furniture and fittings. What they also lose is that peace of mind that most of us take for granted. When you are in a property at risk of flood, as over 6 million people across the United Kingdom are, every single time there is heavy rain, you live in fear that it's going to happen again. And those in flood risk areas will receive Environment Agency text warnings, and in the weeks after the floods, every time they get those warnings, they'll start lifting all their property upstairs in preparation of potential floods. But after 2 or 3 false alarms, they stop doing that. But the fear of being flooded again never leaves them. And that is so important. Obviously, being insured is important. But even those who are insured, being flooded and forced from your home for months at a time is a hugely disturbing and disrupting experience. Following the 2007 floods, 2 things happened. Firstly, the government in 2008, in conjunction with the insurance industry, updated the 2000 Statement of Principles, which subsequently morphed into the Flood Re scheme, which should mean that all residents, even in flood-hit areas, are able to attain flood insurance. I would really stress to anyone who has been flooded that they can still get flood insurance through the Flood Re scheme. This is very important. Many of the people that I met after the floods in 2023 said, oh, well, no one will give us flood insurance around here, and they didn't realise that with the Flood Re scheme they could have been insured. The second thing that changed was that we did get a 250,000 cubic metre flood alleviation scheme on the River Rother at Wingleworth. Whilst this was welcome, Storm Babette, which hit Derbyshire so fearfully on October the 20th, 2023, demonstrated that, tragically, even this scheme was not enough in itself to keep Chesterfield safe. Storm Babette had a devastating effect on Chesterfield, leading to the River Rother and River Hipper bursting their banks. As many as 600 homes and dozens of businesses were flooded. Many of those were the very same ones that were flooded in 2007. And tragically, one of my constituents, Maureen Gilbert, lost her life drowned in the front room of her own home. The economic cost to residents, to businesses, to communities and to our nation is enormous. DEFRA and the Environment Agency estimated that the 2015-16 winter floods cost the nation's economy £1.6 billion. The risk of flooding and the associated costs are only projected to rise over the coming years due to climate change. The Environmental Audit Committee, which I chair, has been investigating the government's approach to flooding resilience in England. We've heard from expert witnesses about the historic underinvestment in flood defences across the country. We also heard about the importance of investing in maintaining existing flood defences as well as in building new ones. In Chesterfield, whilst the Wingleworth flood basin was not enough to prevent that flooding in 2023, it has come into its own over this past winter as the floods that hit on New Year's Day and the weekend afterwards did not lead to any further flooded homes. However, there is still a need for improved protection from flooding for residents on Tapton Terrace, residents in Brampton, around the Chatsworth Road area, in Birdholme, off the Derby Road and around Hornsbridge roundabout. In meetings with management at the Environment Agency locally, I was told that the cost of protecting the homes on Tapton Terrace would actually cost more than the homes would be worth to buy. I was told it would be cheaper for the EA to buy them than to protect them. So I said, well, go on, buy them then. At least give these people the peace of mind. Because the truth is that many people who live in flood-hit areas lose so much of the value of their homes too. And for all, for the vast majority of us, the value of our homes, the most expensive, the biggest asset that we have. Your house goes from 200,000 to 130,000 over the course of a day. There's nothing you can do about that. You are effectively trapped in that property. Now, in fairness, the Environment Agency did investigate, but they came back and said, well, this isn't something that we can do. But I have to say that Tapton Terrace is a particular worry to me because of its proximity to the River Rother. Its geography means the speed with which it floods, I believe, poses a real risk to life, and we have already had one fatality there. And it is very hard to see how anyone living in those properties who doesn't have the mobility to get upstairs is not very seriously at risk, as tragically Mrs Gilbert was in 2023. Yes, I'm very happy to give way.
Thank you to my honourable friend for giving way. I just wonder if he agrees with me that actually in areas where we have significant risk of flooding, why it isn't compulsory at schools where we educate children in particular to build flood plans and it becomes part of the curriculum so that if people do flood or know there's a flood coming, they actually know what they should be doing, because I know for a fact that if they have a plan, people bounce back and the resilience is greater afterwards if they do become flooded.
Well, I mean, he makes a very important point about the importance of plans and the issue of ensuring that children feel able to be supported. My honourable friend and I were both former shadow education ministers, and we know there's no end to the number of things people think should be on the school curriculum, but it's something that should be considered. But I think that also more broadly than that, the need for communities to understand that actually government can't just always build a wall and save them, that actually, in some occasions, particularly as we go forward, there are going to be floods that happen, and there needs to be a local plan about how we support that and how we protect life in those times. And that the whole community needs to be involved, and I think that's a very important point. But I would like the Minister to explain that if the government accepts that in some cases it can't do more to protect an area, in cases like as in Tapton Terrace, what mechanisms might be in place? Who do we need to get round the table to discuss a plan that maybe does involve knocking homes down and potentially building flood-resilient homes there? We did previously have a plan about having all the living space on the first and second floor and just garage space downstairs. And I'd be grateful to hear from my honourable friend, the Minister, on how we can sort of look at getting people around the table to discuss that. Yes, happy to give way to my neighbour.
Member in North East Derbyshire, my constituency, which borders the Honourable Member's constituency of Chesterfield. We're affected by exactly the same issues that he has been outlining and exactly the same rivers. Noting how interlinked all of this is, and he's spoken previously about getting people around the table, one of the things that I found frustrating is coming up time and time against the issue of riparian owners and the really vital role that they play in maintaining watercourses Many riparian owners do so very diligent, but others often aren't even aware of their responsibilities. What does my member think should be the government's way forward on this?
Well, I think she raises a very important point, and it's not one that I was planning to refer to, but it's something I'm sure the Minister will respond to, because she's absolutely right that to an extent we've taken for granted over the years the contribution that, that farmers and others play. They do need to be compensated for it. Many of them want to be a part of that conversation, but in the current climate it's very difficult, and so it is an important point that she raised. Now, I was delighted that my honourable friend, the member for Hull West and Holton Price, the Minister for Water, joined me in Chesterfield earlier this year to see the Wingleworth flood basin in my honourable friend's constituency, and hear why we need a similar scheme in Hollymoorside to protect us all from the River Hipper. The government has recently announced, and I warmly welcome, significant funding for flood defences, including the record £2.65 billion in the next 2 years, £4 billion injection for the 3 years after that, and an additional £7.9 billion over the next decade. And this is a welcome sign that the government is taking flooding seriously. However, we are now waiting for the government to consult on the revised formula, which will determine the allocation of this vital flooding. When an area is flooded, the local authority is compelled to produce a report, known as the Section 19 report, to investigate how the local response worked and identify recommendations for future flood readiness. Derbyshire's Section 19 investigation took an inordinate amount of time to produce what is a relatively short document. It set out a number of potential recommendations and investigations. Final report took over 16 months from the day of the floods before it was put before the County Council's Cabinet for approval. And it appears very little of that report has led to any concrete actions to mitigate the flood risk in Chesterfield. It will soon be 2 years since Storm Babette, with some people still not able to return to their homes. And if we do have another flood event this autumn, without my constituents seeing any significant efforts being made to try to protect homes and businesses, and they will understandably feel very let down. The Section 19 report stated that to protect central Chesterfield and Tapton Terrace, Derbyshire County Council, in partnership with the Environment Agency, will be looking to identify potential sites for flood storage within the Spittal Brook catchment to slow its flow into the River Rother. They were also looking to identify potential sites for flood storage within the Homebrook catchment, including at Lineker Reservoir, to slow the flow of Homebrook, again protecting central Chesterfield, Tapton Terrace and the Brampton area. The report also stated that DCC are exploring the feasibility of removing the bridge at Crow Lane near Tapton Terrace, and that the Environment Agency is investigating whether an updated dredging assessment is required on the River Rother near Tapton Terrace. The report also states that the EA is exploring options to be able to progress a scheme to deliver upstream flood storage on the River Hipper, which would also reduce flood risk to downstream communities in Chesterfield. Now, the option that I think is really needed is this major scheme on the River Hipper at Hollymoorside. But it is unclear what other schemes are being considered, what investigations are taking place, and when decisions will be made or work completed. I'm also told that Yorkshire Water is investigating the feasibility of a storage measure at Horns Bridge to be introduced during the next asset management programme period. I'm pursuing this with Yorkshire Water, and whilst I'd always prefer a roundabout to be flooded than people's homes, I would again like to see some real urgency to act, as the closure of Hornsbridge roundabout brings Chesterfield to a standstill and hugely affects transport between the M1 and Sheffield, Derby and Manchester. Derbyshire County Council set up the Derbyshire Strategic Flood Group. I attended the first meeting at which the council said they would start to investigate costs and feasibility of the schemes I've referred to. But that was over 18 months after Storm Babette had taken place. The next meeting is not planned for months, and whilst this work is investigated, and again it makes me question how seriously and urgently Derbyshire County Council are taking their job of flood risk management. So the real message I want to be heard by the government from this debate, and heard by Derbyshire County Council, Yorkshire Water, the Environment Agencies and all the other bodies involved, is that we need to see real urgency in the approach to reducing flood risk and protecting Chesterfield. Can the Minister, in responding, explain what she can do to help me to imbue the local authorities with more of a sense of urgency about these works, both large and small? Secondly, does the Minister believe that the Section 19 process is fit for purpose? If a Section 19 report identifies the causes of flooding and makes recommendations for what is needed to reduce the risk in future, but then there are no statutory requirements on what measures are needed or even timescales for investigations into what work is needed to reduce the risk, how will the public have confidence in that process? Thirdly, can the Minister update the House on her new funding formula, and can she give us any indication as to whether we are more likely to see flood funding for Chesterfield as a result? How is this formula going to be different from what went before? In the meantime, residents of Chesterfield are looking ahead at another potentially rainy autumn and winter. Will the Minister be able to give the people of Chesterfield assurance that she understands how desperately we need to see action to further protect people's homes? Is she aware that the River Hipper scheme will also support a major regeneration project in Brampton on the former Robinson site, as well as over 50 businesses which were flooded in 2023, and many more that are nearby and escaped this time? So, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad I've had this opportunity to give voice to the frustration that flood victims in my constituency feel, and look forward to the Minister giving me some hope to take back to the people of Chesterfield following this debate.
The question is that this House has considered improving flood defences in Chesterfield. Minister.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And my honourable friend is quite right to highlight the mental health impacts that the flooding has on a community, on the individuals. And he's right. I think he used the phrase that once you've been flooded, you're always a flood victim. And I think he's quite right to highlight that and the appalling and awful tragic loss of life that he had in his constituency, and sadly that we see in other parts of the country as well. And of course, I hope it goes without saying, any assistance I can give in getting people around the table, very happy to do that. Before I move to sort of the general speech, on the Section 19 report, let me take that away and have a look as to why is it taken so long for your Section 19 report, and how does this compare to other Section 19 reports on the country, so I can get a bit of a basis as to what's happening and whether yours is an anomaly or whether that is standard, and if it is standard, clearly we need to do something about it. So let me take that away as a point. And I hope, if nothing else, I can express here the urgency that I see in dealing with flood risk, because he's right. Everyone's been right when they've said climate change is real. Climate change makes flood risk more common. We know from the NAFRA 2 reports that we're going to have 1 in 4 homes at risk of flooding by the mid-century. The government's putting in a record amount of funding, but we're putting in a record amount of funding at the same time climate change is making the situation ever worse. And so there is definitely an urgency from myself as to what we can do about it. And I completely understand how anxious his constituents feel, and when the honourable gentleman described that sort of anxiety when they see rain clouds, when they see that it's going to be wet, and that nervousness around what's going to happen. And it was really helpful coming to see the constituency together and going to visit the schemes and see the streets for myself, so I could really picture the individual circumstances he's faced. So thank him so much for that invitation. So obviously I've spoken to the Environment Agency ahead of this debate and want to give you a bit of an Thank you very much. But I could also give one to you as well, Mr. Chairman. But we'd like to give my honourable friend an update on some of the things. So the EA recently completed the project to refurbish a section of the flood wall on the River Rother, which was damaged during Storm Babette. £75,000 of DEFRA flood defence funding has been allocated to the Avenue Flood Storage Reservoir, which was obviously the one the honourable gentleman and I visited together. But as quite rightly, as the honourable gentleman said, it operated during Storm Babette, but there was still widespread flooding downstream. So this funding is going to allow the EA to investigate any improvements that can be made to how it operates to hopefully reduce more flood risk. So the Environment Agency are working with the Council to investigate the removal of or raising of several bridges along the River Hipper and the River Rother. This is at early stage, but this is to really look at how to improve flow and reduce the risk of blockages again, which was an issue raised previously. So in addition, the Environment Agency, Derby County Council, the Don Catchment Rivers Trust are exploring natural flood management opportunities for the Hipper and Spittlebrook catchments. And I know the honourable gentleman knows what a fan I am of natural flood management, and I'll come to the flood funding formula and how that can enable natural flood management. They've also secured just under £400,000 of funding towards the River Hipper Flood Alleviation Scheme to support the development of the business case. So they're on with the development stage of this project. So this includes £275,000 of local levy from the Yorkshire Regional Flood and Coastal Committee and £60,000 from Chesterfield Borough Council. And this scheme will protect over 200 homes and businesses. Now, at this moment, this is obviously pre our funding formula review, at this moment it's currently estimated to cost 16 million and have a funding gap of under 14 million, but that's under the current rules. However, this could change as a result of our funding rules. So just to say a bit more about our funding consultation. So the current approach to flooding formula was done by the previous government in 2011, and it's outdated and not working as it should do. It neglects more innovative approaches such as natural flood management, and in fact the solution the previous government had was to set a separate fund for natural flood management rather than integrating it into how does the formula work as a whole. So our proposed changes is looking at funding the first £3 million of projects fully by government. And this really unlocks lots of natural flood management because there are many smaller natural flood management schemes which are less than 3 million, which are struggling because they can't get the partnership funding to close that gap. And by saying we will fully fund projects up to 3 million, it means those smaller schemes that we can get on with it. And then a flat rate after that of 90% government contribution, 10% partnership funding. So for the honourable, my honourable friend, in the case of his project, if his project was successful in the business case and going forward, it would be looking at 90% government funding and having to find 10% partnership funding, which is very different to the situation that they're currently facing. We would also fully fund the refurbishment of existing flood assets. Another problem we recognise is that when, understandably, people are saying, well, why do we need partnership funding to fund an asset that already exists and the maintenance of that? So our flooding formula consultation says we would fully fund refurbishment of assets as well. So these changes make it really easier, much easier for natural flood management. However, that means that many projects move through to the prioritisation stage. So the first stage is, have we got the does it meet the tests to go through to prioritisation? Then it comes to prioritisation, because there's obviously, even though we're putting a record amount of money into flooding, there's a certain amount there to be allocated. And so the consultation looks at prioritisation and what do we want to prioritise when we're deciding which projects go ahead and which don't. Are we looking at a very basic value for money in terms of numbers of properties protected, but obviously that has an impact on rural communities? Are we looking at prioritising natural flood management? Are we looking at prioritising areas of deprivation? What is the prioritisation criteria? And that's what the consultation's asking. Are we prioritising frequently flooded as another criteria? To put weighting towards which ones actually go through to be built. So that's the consultation that's happening at the moment. So at this moment, I can't answer whether it would make it easier or harder for my honourable friend to get his scheme developed. But what I can say, it's the partnership funding which is held up my honourable friend's scheme at the moment. That would be dealt with under our consultation, because 90% would be government, 10% would be partnership. But then in terms of prioritising, okay, so which ones do you do first then? That really does depend, and it is a genuinely open consultation to listen to what is the criteria that people want to prioritise, because we obviously have to be really careful when we're spending any government money in determining what is a fair and transparent system as to which projects get built first and which don't. So, as has been mentioned, we're investing a record amount, 4.2 billion over 3 years, to build, maintain and repair existing flood defences. This is a 5% increase in our annual average investment compared to our existing spend, which was already a record amount of spending. So I hope that demonstrates the government's commitment and urgency to this situation. So with this current funding, 1,000 flood schemes have been or will continue to be supported, better protecting 52,000 homes and businesses by March 2026. On top of that, a further 14,500 properties will have their expected level of protection maintained or restored through essential maintenance activities. And as my honourable friends all know, we inherited flood defences in their worst state on record. The condition of key flood defences in England was at the lowest it had been since the financial year 2009-10, with only 92% of assets at the required condition. So we're putting in this current financial year 430 million into constructing new schemes, while a further 220 million we use to restate flood defences back to the condition that they need to be. And that full list was published in March. And then we announced last week £7.9 billion of funding, which is the largest flooding programme in history as part of our landmark infrastructure strategy. But there are many other changes that we're introducing as well, and I can see I'm really running out of time. And SUDS, what was the other point was mentioned? Compulsory purchase. Yeah, my honourable friend recognises the Environment Agency can only compulsory purchase something if it's for building a specific scheme. And I know that, sadly, not only himself but other people have raised around the country the problem of properties devaluing when they're continually at risk of flooding. And I wonder whether in those particular circumstances, which I saw for myself, maybe have another conversation about property flood resilience measures and whether more can be done to support those homes as well. So we have a radical change with our flooding formula. This makes it much simpler so that people around the country can really clearly understand that it will be first £3 million fully funded, after that 90% government, 10% partnership funding. And this is intended to equalise the system everywhere, because at the moment we have a system that nobody quite understands as to why does one scheme have a partnership funding gap of 40 million in my honourable friend's case, and another scheme doesn't have a partnership funding gap at all. This makes the system much clearer, but I would urge everybody, Mr Chairman, everyone to respond to that flooding consultation, everybody to think about how do they want government money to be prioritised, so that we can protect as many people as possible from the devastating impact that we know causes such a problem, not only for the local economy but also for their mental health. So we will continue to build and repair flood defences while also delivering natural flood management and sustainable drainage systems, and we will make sure that this country is more resilient to floods. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered improving flood defences in Chesterfield. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.